I want to start. First, I want to start by bringing you into my thought partner process. As you heard in my introduction, I do not present myself as an expert. Anyone who says they are an expert in this work, please don't hire them. Don't bring them to your forums. That is not what you need. They're not going to help you. What I try to do is I try to position myself to relate to the discourse and the conversations that need to be had around EDI. And one missing area of many that have been invisible in our spaces is the needs of students' parents. But if you distill that down more, it's just not the needs of student parents, it is the needs of student parents who are the most vulnerable. Often those who are cross-sectional and different identities that have been oppressed or structurally excluded from education. And so that's going to be those who are student parents who are single parents, those who are mothers, Black mothers in particular, those who live and grew up in urban areas, those who went to a high school in an urban area, those who grew up in a family where you didn't have support. Maybe you transitioned out of foster care. Those intersections often are even lost in our research and discussions around student parent. So before I go into my presentation, I want to share with you one of my boundaries in this work as a diversity officer is that I don't get in the arena to debate my own oppression, but I'm going to share with you my personal story through my talk today. And so I'm going to ask you to reflect on some of your own biases you might have around the idea of caregiving and student parents, and think about, are you centering yourself oftentimes? Are you making space, giving space, or are you profiting off of your privilege in this space and not doing the work of figuring out what students really need to thrive? So when I say student parent to you, you don't have to answer, but if you want to put things in the chat, you can. What do you think of? What is a student parent? And if you're a person that's a researcher, go to the statistics. What are the statistics of student parents? What is a student parent? If you're a person that has a lived experience, what was your lived experience? Lean on that. What is a student parent? What do you think of? Again, you don't have to respond, but if you have thoughts, put it in the chat. Someone said my mom was a PH candidate when I was a child, and I remember going to class with her a lot. Thank you for that. A teacher, a mentor. I'm gonna give you some thoughts around student parents. What our typical student parents look like, especially in our UW system, especially in Wisconsin. Most of our student parents are first gen. Most of our student parents do not start in the UW system. And I'll unpack that a little bit later. Why don't they start in the UW system? Why don't they start at four-year institutions? Typically, a student parent is younger. We often consider our student parents non-traditional students, but there is a distinct difference between someone who is a student parent who is getting a PhD candidate, I was one, and a student parent who had a child when they were a teenager. Now they're trying to finish a high school diploma. Now they need career planning and a career exposure to figure out a pathway for them. That is a different type of student parent, but our student parents typically don't start in our system when they are younger. Our student parents, if they're African-American female, are typically a single parent, not just a student parent. Our single student parents typically live in poverty. Our student parents typically have transportation issues. Our student parents typically rely on state subsidies in the state of Wisconsin. That would be the shares, Wisconsin shares, to be able to go to school and afford childcare. Our student parents typically can't afford childcare. Our student parents typically need to go to school at night. Our system, most of our childcare systems in our system and through the state close at 6 p.m. Our student parents are left without a place to put their child. So I just want you to think of that. Think about who are our student parents, and then reflect in your own spaces as I go through my presentation. Are we serving those students? Do we have capacity to serve those students? We're having a whole forum about them. Are we having a forum about them without them? Because are they even in our spaces? So now I'm going to go to my presentation. See if I can get it to. Yeah. Our student parents are invisible on our campus. Last year, I talked about the invisible caregiver, and caregiver can describe many facets of being a caregiver, and one does include those who are parents. And what I want to do is my presentation really is going to focus on the unique intersection of being a student parent. I'm going to highlight the most vulnerable student parents in that and talk about caregiving through that lens and intersected with my work as an EDI professional. Like I said earlier, there are many individuals who are invisible on our campus. Our student parents continue to be one of them. It is surprising to me that COVID sparked a conversation around caregiving needs that hadn't happened for decades. I started and working in the UW system, my first job out of college, I worked at UW Milwaukee and the now Student Success Program. It was then called the Life Impact Program. This was in 2005, so I am dating myself, I'm a little older, but I worked in that program in the startup. So we were a startup, we were a pilot program. We were supposed to last 5 years. We had been given a $3 million grant. Actually, financial aid was given a $3 million grant to figure out how we can retain a vulnerable population. And at that time, the institution parents had been maybe an invisible population. It was coming off of welfare reform in our state. And so still even to this day, welfare reform continues to impact student parents who want to work and get education in our state. Still our shares to be able to get a subsidy, you only can get a subsidy for 24 months to be able to use it for education. So you have to work to use it. So what we wanted to do was to give a scholarship to students, give them support in terms of emergency funds, stipends, connect them to resources in the community. So that meant sometimes helping them sign up for Section 8 housing, helping them get rent assistance, helping them secure childcare or find a childcare center that was connected to Young Star in our state that would qualify for a subsidy. Help them make plans for transition when childcares were closed or our school closed, and there was an opportunity for them to work on a day off. So they were invisible, and our mission is that we serve students who were disadvantaged was our goal. But what we didn't do at the time was set into motion the wraparound supports to ensure students that left our institution weren't further disadvantaged by the impact of not having the supports they needed and access to resources they needed to thrive outside of our institution. So what did that need to look like? What I've also seen is a spark in more initiatives. I don't like to call them initiatives around our system. This focus on student parent because of caregiving needs that now have started to impact the privileged poor, the privileged faculty member, the privileged employee, and we are minimizing this in some of our spaces, again, the needs of student parents. And when we do amplify them, we think that one person serving an entire campus of student parents with different intersecting identities, issues, like they're not one monolithic group, can be served. All you need to support a student is one person to connect them to resources. That is not true. It's not necessarily a support person, but policies and procedures and bylaws that are implemented into the structures of our institutions that ensure that a student has the opportunity to have full access. Treat those students as though they are high needs, as though we treat our first gen low income students. We also sometimes will forget that we don't have the sample size at our institution to do surveys, to do intentional sampling with our students to really understand their lived experience. The students that are going to inform us, that are in our pipeline, not at our institutions yet, aren't going to come to UW system schools. They're not coming to us. So the students that we are surveying are the students that were able to figure out some type of social capitalism, either that is finding a mentor and a faculty member, a staff member to help them be retained and thrive at our institutions. But the students who don't have that ability or lack that social capital aren't going to come to our spaces because they can't create those opportunities for themselves. And one person serving as a support person is not going to be able to do it. So what we continue to do is perpetuate these inequities. We focus our caregiving wants and kind of our initiatives on those who are still privileged in spaces, because the ones that are most vulnerable aren't even here yet. So how do we build the structure for those students to even consider coming to our spaces and not get them here and treat it as though it's predatory? Come here, we're going to figure it out with you, when we don't even have the capacity to do that. We don't have the capacity to make sure that they have all of their needs, social needs met, to be able to come to our institution. And I'm not just talking about financial aid opportunities, but the social needs met for them to be able to thrive. When they're coming to our spaces, especially those who are double minoritized, already at a disadvantage. So how do we ensure that they don't leave further disadvantaged? Sorry, I'm gonna give you a secret. I'm coming off of having COVID, so my voice might crack. So then, do we not do anything? Of course not. We have to start somewhere. So I go on this rant all the time about, this kind of romanticizing story. It's almost like a beautiful love story we tell about the faculty member or the staff members in higher education who were able to get tenured before they have a child. They were able to do research while they were parenting. Like, these are great stories. But imagine if you're someone like me who aged out of foster care. I got a high school diploma from Milwaukee Area Technical College before I went to UW-Milwaukee. I started my high school or my college with a 1-year-old and pregnant. When I went to my classes, and faculty members would say, well, I want to have children, and I'm in a sociology class. I want to have children one day. I'm 32, but people always say you should get tenured first, or people always say this. Like, I can't even relate to that. I can't even aspire to see myself through this lens of privilege that I will never have as a minoritized woman in spaces where me as a mother is looked down upon, or I'm looked at as someone who can only thrive if they create a system where I can exist and still not give me a seat at the table, but not give me a meal to eat alongside of them, right? So how do I do that? So it's great. I participated in Life Impact, not as a student. I didn't even know that there was opportunities to access resources on campus when I was a student. And honestly, I did not have time. I could only afford to put my children in the daycare center at UW-Milwaukee twice a week. I put them in daycare Tuesday and Thursdays, and I had all of my classes on Tuesday and Thursdays. At 4 p.m., I would have to go pick them up, drop them off at a sitter, and come back to school. When I would drop them off in the morning, I would have to park in the limited parking to run them in, and then go park at a shuttle parking lot to then park my car, get on the shuttle, and come back to school. All of that time, I did not have an instructor who would want to understand why I was late. I didn't have resources on campus through advisors, even the African American Center or other campus resources that would know how to advocate for my needs. That wasn't something that was available to me at the time. So when I became an advisor, a life coach for the Life Impact program, our goal then was to figure out ways to have not only opportunity for our students to be able to navigate the challenges or the elitism that exists in higher education, especially a four-year institution, but to take pride in having boundaries and advocating for themselves on campus and off campus. At the time, we didn't have child changing stations in our bathrooms, so we advocated for that. We didn't have collapsed resources and workshops amongst the Women's Center, the Children's Center, and what we were doing. We were very siloed. We looked for partnership across our institutions to make sure that we were creating space and soft handoffs and no wrong door for a student parent to go to get service. A student didn't come to us and we say, oh, we can only serve you. And we would often hear across campus, you know where you should go because you're a student parent? Life Impact, which was great. But that student didn't necessarily need to come to us. That student needed someone to be able to understand right then their lived experience and make a soft handoff, make a connection, not treat them othered. So even though initiatives in our system I've seen many proposals across our campuses for a student support specialist. It's not enough. As I always say that diversity, equity, and inclusion is everybody's job, especially when it comes to minoritized and other structurally excluded students, and I count student parents in that. It's inclusion for our student parents is everybody's job. So how do you do that? There's a couple things or a couple ways we can start doing this. I'm challenged often by the idea of creating space in the UW system, especially at UW Oshkosh, for students to really feel that their sense of belonging is affirmed. And this isn't just for student parents, this is for every structurally excluded student, right? What we often do is we segregate them and then say that we're serving them. We then over-survey them, we overuse them, we rely on their emotional labor we take from them in order for us to serve them. And I want to challenge us to stop doing that. Understand the student, understand that unique student, and not as though being a student parent is a shared identity among all students who have children, because it's not. It is definitely different for a student who lives in poverty, who is single, who is racialized in our spaces. It is a different experience. It is different from someone who does not have a parent or support system who is educated. It is different if you are a student who's a grad student and you have support. I always say, I wish I would have been able to go to R1 school for my PhD. I could not. I couldn't go to night school to obtain a PhD. I had to go to an opportunity where I could go to school on the weekend. There's not even opportunity for our undergrad students now with online, but to access education in different modalities that's going to help them prioritize their family. So understand those intersectional identities that exist in student parents. And then improve on the data that we collect on our student parents. Again, I'm always, anytime I'm sent a report on student parents, I know this will sound like I'm very judgmental, sometimes I am, but I'm like, I know that they don't have the sample size that I'm thinking of. So without access to the people we're talking about, how can we continue to publish reports on people that don't even exist? They don't even have access to our space. So how are we even surveying them? And the way we are doing it, is it a privileged narrative? Is there nuance to the privilege? Think about that. I also appreciated something UW-Milwaukee does really well. It gives students the opportunity, or gives older students the opportunity to audit classes, and really sells that to them, sells lifelong learning to our older adults. We don't do a good job allowing opportunity for our students who are just shopping us to audit our classes, to audit our spaces, especially our student parents. When I was the director of adult education at MATC, my goal, I served 36 unique community-based organizations who all had different needs. And so I would have students sometimes who were fearful of the relationship that they would have with their faculty member. They didn't feel like they would be able to connect, they would be judged, and they wouldn't be successful because of the classroom dynamic. So I would give students an opportunity to go see it, go see and feel it. If it's not for you, I'm going to try to to find another opportunity for you. I think, especially as someone who had to go when I was pregnant and tell my faculty member the first day, I am due this date, I want to take this class, I might need to give birth and come back. And at the time, we didn't have Title IX protection for pregnant students. And she was flexible, but not, I went to all of my faculty members. They some of them were not. Some of them told me I should drop and take it at a different time. So I think our students deserve an opportunity to shop our faculty and shop our institutions before we take money from them, right? I also think that outside of just one office, one person who is dedicated to student support success of student parents, there needs to be an increase of high touch practices that embed all of the DEI, EDI best practices in it. Just the way we spend time figuring out How do we make sure other structurally excluded students are included? There needs to be equity audits around our student parents. I think about just the opportunity that a lot of institutions take upon doing like accessibility, either website accessibility or physical accessibility for students who have disabilities. And I know a lot of our institutions are failing in that space. We don't have ramps, we don't have access areas. Imagine someone trying to push a stroller around campus. If someone can't access spaces in a wheelchair, a parent's not going to be able to access spaces with a stroller. I teach right now a special topic class in one of our buildings on the 3rd floor. I was teaching last night and went into one of the stalls, and there was a changing table. And then I thought to myself, how would a student parent even know that this changing table is in here? It's on the edge of campus. First of all, it's not like we're saying your child is welcome into this space. So how would a student even know that that space existed? And then I had a realization, it's not for our students. It's back to that romanticizing of, oh, this Dr. So-and-so had a baby. They can bring their baby to show everybody on campus. They can now go into the restroom and change their baby. We don't do that same thing when we find out our students are pregnant and expecting. We don't romanticize it for them. Oftentimes we shame them. Oftentimes we tell them, you know what, you can't go into your lab because you're pregnant. You can't participate in this because you're pregnant. Well, you have children. Maybe you shouldn't take a class at this time, or maybe you should think of a different sitter so you don't come to school late. How do we increase our high touch practices for our students? I also think it's important for us to think about our flexible course options. Right now, I see an increase in the flexibility of course offerings to move online, but then we forget about our students who might be online because they have children in the spaces with them. And then they're told, well, you have to have your camera on. Well, you have to have this time test. If you don't, I'm going to think you're cheating. That they're told all of these barriers, and there's no flexibility to believe that they're doing the best that they can. So what is the flexibility of our course offerings? Even when we try to make them flexible, we still put up barriers for our student parents. And the last thing I'll touch on again is just back to how do we measure? I have a whole wish list of data I wish we could have so I can make informed real-time decisions, but we don't. I also believe sometimes we spend too much time saying that we need to audit or we need to survey and we need to pinpoint that there is an issue before we solve the issue. We don't. We can say this is an issue and we can do something about it. And in that, we could do an appreciative inquiry to find out what are the barriers. But we don't have to wait for someone to do research and do data to identify right now that there is a barrier for the students who are the most vulnerable student parents in our society and our communities who want to be educated to come to our doors. We can address that right now. We can address that by being more transparent about the financial aid opportunities for our student parents. We can address that by figuring out more career planning opportunities for students, connecting with some of our workforce agencies where student parents and parents have to go if they want to utilize CARES or shares in our state to access childcare. They have to go either to education, employment, or job training. We should be connecting with job training agencies, telling them about opportunities for further education, even if it's a stop, get an associate degree, then a pathway to a bachelor's and a pathway to a master's. We make our education so unattainable and so elitist that students can't even see themselves in those spaces, right? So focus on students who are in our institution, yes, by centering them, nothing about them without them. Also realize that there's a more vulnerable population out there exists that are never going to come to our spaces. And as we see the dwindle of from high school to college age students dwindle, as we see our retention dwindle, as we see majority of our comprehensive universities in Wisconsin move towards open access, know that there are different types of students in our pipeline that we are not ready for. How do we prepare ourselves for those students? Because we're going to have to think of new ways to recruit and get students to our door and think of different marketing strategies for the students who have never thought about education, because the ones that we have been going after they're not coming here anymore, or the number is just dwindling. So there's a unique opportunity to figure out, how do we have capacity for all student parents? And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Demira, for giving us all of those amazing ways to really reach out and help students and bring them into the community. So again, thank you. I wanted to just quickly apologize for the confusion in the chat. The chat has been disabled, but I would like to direct you to put your comments in or questions in the Q&A down there at the bottom of your screen. And so please use that to ask questions as we go along through the session today. Now I'd like to pass it over to Rachel Kubizak, the director of the Student Parent Success Program at UW-Milwaukee, to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Jenny. So my name is Rachel Kubizak, and I am the program lead for the Student Parent Success Program at UW-Milwaukee. Our mission is to provide UWM students with children holistic support designed to empower parents and improve their families' overall economic and social success. We are part of the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And as Demira shared, we have been providing support to parenting students at UWM since 2005. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you today, having these important conversations. I'm very excited and eager to introduce our next panelist, Olivia McCants. Olivia is the Assistant Director of Career Services at the Johns Hopkins University's Bloomberg School of Public Health. In her roles prior to Hopkins, she served as a career advisor, employer relations specialist, and associate director of employer relations at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She is a two-time alumna of UW-Milwaukee, as she holds a Master of Science in Administrative Leadership with an emphasis in higher education and administration, and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. Olivia transitioned from a traditional college student to a student caregiver when she had her daughter in her junior year of her undergraduate studies. Now, as a mother of two children, expecting her third and married to her college sweetheart, she recognizes the difficulties and triumphs of being a student caregiver as a pivotal turning point that propelled her forward. I will pass to you, Olivia.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you as well, Stephanie, for reaching out and inviting me here today. Really looking forward to be able to have this conversation with you all. And there's so many points in which Demira pointed out that I find to be true for myself and my own experience. And so what I really want to do today is bring you all into that experience and what it was like for me as a student parent. So as Rachel mentioned, I became a student parent when I was in my junior year of my undergraduate studies. I started very much as a traditional student. On paper, I would say my background, my home life was not one that was particularly stable, not one that you would probably characterize as traditional. And so me starting college in and of itself was a great accomplishment. Being able to attend the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and have the support that I did. I was in a space where I was moving through college. I had finished my freshman year as well as my sophomore year. And I was your typical college student in many of the ways that you might think. So I was living in the residence halls, and of course I was participating in different activities, going to my courses, and just having a social life all around. You know, I spent a lot of time in the library. And then it was about halfway through my junior year in which I found out that I was pregnant. Up until that point, I had a trajectory of graduating in 5 years. And, you know, there were many things that I was looking forward to doing. I was actually planning to study abroad this summer, leading up to that point, as well as joining student activities. And so for me, it was a life-changing moment, of course, but not so much just because that I was going to be bringing another life into the world, but very much because of where I was in my current space. So when I found out I was pregnant, there were many questions that I had, many questions that people asked me, one of them being, you know, if I was going to stop and take some time off from school and how I was going to figure it out. And for me, it was never a matter of if I was going to finish college, but merely how. For me, college was it was a way out in many different ways because I did not have the best home life, not coming from the greatest examples as far as childhood, being a first generation student. College in many ways was how I survived. Leaving home at 17, I did not have any other way to provide a roof over my head or to make sure that I had food or transportation. So being enrolled in school, utilizing college grants and scholarships and even some loans is how I was able to, stay in the residence halls. It was how I was able to get a meal plan and utilize the Milwaukee County transit system to get around the city. It provided a lot for me. It was more than just education. It was my survival. So finding out that I was going to be bringing another life into the world, it was very difficult. It was difficult because I myself was just trying to figure out how to take care of me. There's many things that I feel like along the way have been glamorized by my story and where I'm at now, which I'm most appreciative of, but I really want to kind of just bring you into some of those challenges of being a student parent, as well as the many triumphs. One of them being, beyond having to figure out how to provide for my child, but just considering the way in which I was going to finish college. So I decided the summer that I found out I was pregnant, I found out in February. And that summer I decided to take a full course load. So I took 12 credits worth of courses over the summer because I said, I'm going to do as much as I can before she gets here, because I know that it's going to be a lot harder once she is here. And so that in itself was difficult. I worked 3 jobs. I took 12 credits and I really just had to focus in on what that goal was to be able to provide for her. Within 9 months, I found an apartment. I began to save so that I would be able to provide for her, when she got here. I got my driver's license, I got a car. There's so many things that I essentially had to expedite because I was becoming a parent, and I did a lot of preparation for what I thought the experience would be like, right? The things that I thought that I needed to have. And they were important and I did need them, but I did not have as much guidance as I probably needed as far as what it meant to be a student and a parent at the same time. And so as I began to navigate that, it really resonated with me how much I needed support. And so I leaned into that support, into the support that I got from folks at UW Milwaukee, from different individuals, those who are friends of mine, my chosen family, people who had really been there for me and taking care of me along the way. My boyfriend at the time, who's not my husband, and his family, being someone who was in a place where I had to be very independent and figure things out for myself. It was difficult to ask for help. And that's something that I encourage all student parents to do, is find that place of asking for help and then ask again, because I had to get to a point of saying that no is just not an acceptable answer. So even if I can't get support in this way, I'm going to move forward and I'm going to find a different way. Other challenges in just being able to figure out how I'm going to attend classes. I was fortunate enough that I got support from the Children's Learning Center at UW Milwaukee. And so my daughter was there up until the age of 5. And they offered support by providing a discount to the students so that we essentially did not have to pay as much for the child care as other individuals. That for me was very helpful. As I shared, I was in a place when I got pregnant that I didn't have much, I was just your typical college student, kind of just figuring things out on my own. So that's something that really kind of pushed me forward. It allowed me the opportunity to not only attend classes, but be able to go to study groups, to study on my own, to really just kind of focus in and prepare for different tests. It implemented a form of routine into the, I would say, so-called work-life balance, because I don't know if that's necessarily something that anyone truly has, but it helped. It helped a great deal to know that I had that support, leaning into the individuals that I worked with as well. So I was a student worker at the time, and those 3 jobs I had were 3 different positions at UW Milwaukee across 3 different departments. And so, having supervisors who were just cheering me on, who were championing me, and really kind of just like pushing me forward and recognizing that this is something that I wanted to do and that I was going to make happen. But there were also some incredible challenges along the way. There were times where, you know, my boyfriend and I had to make sacrifices where we chose not to eat so that we could get formula for our daughter. There were so many things that even with the support that I had, that I also had to make some very difficult decisions. And I had to sit with myself and say, what is it that I really want out of this and this experience? And becoming a student parent, this realization that it was bigger than me. Everything was bigger than me after that. There was so much that I wanted for my daughter that I knew she needed, and not even just in the way of physical things, but just the amount of love to offer to a child. And so pushing through that is something that really propelled me forward to be able to focus in on her and how I can support her. With that, there were other ways in which I learned how to manage my time. So, you know, just making sure that I pretty much wrote out everything as far as, you know, when my exam dates were and, you know, when was this project due. And so I had to buckle down and organize my life in a way that I never had before. And I don't know if that's something that a lot of individuals consider for student parents. You know, you are juggling so much. And as Demira shared, many of them as student parents, we're individuals who are very young, right? When we had our children, and in that moment of time, especially in undergraduate studies, if you're coming as a traditional student and then you end up becoming a non-traditional student like myself, there are so many things that you're figuring out at once. And that's something that you need support with, you know, something that you need guidance with. So those who are supporting student parents, I definitely urge you to be that bridge for them, help mend those gaps. You know, there are many questions that student parents, they don't even know to ask, and they kind of find out on their own because they have to, you know. So being able to just listen to them, sometimes even reading in between the lines. There's so many things that are coupled with the experience of being a student parent, from being first generation to food insecurity, to how to navigate, you know, getting to class. And unfortunately, there aren't all of the instructors aren't always as understanding. You know, I see many times on social media where there's like a faculty person who was holding a child doing a class, and that is wonderful. That type of support goes a long way, but that's also not everyone's experience. And so for me, navigating childcare, you know, having that hard stop where we had to pick our daughter up at 6 o'clock was hard sometimes. After I graduated, I moved on to get my master's, and many of my classes were at night. My husband worked, and he had to work well into, you know, the 7 o'clock hour. And we had to figure out how to, you know, get our daughter from childcare. And there were friends who stepped up, who supported us, who would pick her up and be with her until we could get to her. It really was just a process of leaning into people, and truly the embodiment of it takes a village. And that is something that has been so powerful for me to realize, if it's not just from school, from UW-Milwaukee and the support that I got from the different resources there. I wasn't a part of the Life Impact Program, but I definitely had support from Rachel and those who were involved, who shared resources with me, as well as the different places that I worked at. Those individuals became mentors to me. They became, in so many ways, like a parental figure that pushed, that guidance that I needed. And it went such a long way. I mean, these are individuals who were my supervisors when I was, you know, a freshman in college, who are now still attending familiar events. You know, my daughter's birthday in November, I have a supervisor who still comes to that to this day, who saw me in the very beginning, who saw all those struggles and how I was trying to figure things out. And so that support is pivotal. It may not go to that full extent of where you become like family, but to know that there are people in your life, people who don't even really owe you anything at all, but are willing to just be there for you, to listen, to share information out about a job opportunity, different courses that you might be able to take to further yourself. There's so many ways in which student parents need help. And I feel like because of that help, I was able to continue going. Many people along the way have asked me, well, how'd you do it? How did you graduate college and then go on to get a master's and transition into your career? And how are you where you are now? And honestly, it is because of the support and the help that I got from other individuals. I was fortunate enough to be in a position where my child's father was also there. I've never had the experience of being a single mother. And so I recognize that as a privilege in and of itself, because that is something that is not the case for other individuals. I recognize my intersectionality as a Black woman who came from a low income environment, who was an at-risk youth, who pretty much had a lot of the odds stacked against me. And I recognize that I'm also someone who is very determined and quite dedicated to the things that I am setting my eyes forward on, but also realizing that even with my own dedication, I have to tap into the resources around me. And so if you're working with students, that's something that I encourage of you, is to really push students to advocate for themselves as student parents, to really search for those resources, because sometimes they're not always apparent and readily available. Sometimes there has to be a lot of digging done. There has to be a great determination. There are many times in which I was told no, that I ran out of my financial aid package for my work study, which means I no longer could work, which means I no longer could provide, and where I had to sit in multiple financial aid and HR offices around the university to figure out how can I get more financial support so that I can continue working and providing for my child. And that's something that came from other folks really pushing me to say, you can't give up. You have to continue on. Once I made the decision that this is what I was going to do, there were other individuals who were saying, okay, yes, this is what you're going to do. We're going to help you and make sure that it happens. I also really want to speak to the day-to-day of what it is to be a student parent and all the things that you have to juggle. For me, once I graduated with my bachelor's and received my master's degree, I was working full-time. I was in a master's program full-time, and then I also had a family. And so that was something that was not easy to navigate. Many people would probably say that I was out of my mind for trying to do all of it at once, but I knew that I was in a place that if it didn't happen now, it may not happen later for me. And there's a certain element of self-awareness that I felt like was important for that. There are many individuals who can take that break and take that pause and then come back. And if that's what works for you, absolutely, you should do that. But I knew that I needed to get this done. And so that day-to-day life of just trying to balance work and school, and then coming home and all the responsibilities, and essentially having like that triple thought pattern of trying to figure out, how I'm gonna make sure that my daughter is getting to where she needs to on time, and I'm getting to classes, and I have to leave work at this time and navigate so many different things. It's not even just in the physical, but there's so much thought and mental labor that goes into the experience of being a student parent that I'm not sure that everyone realizes. It's more than just I go to classes and I learn information and I study for exams, and I'm able to partake in a lot of the social elements. A lot of that was off the table for me. My life had completely changed, and I did not have pretty much any friends that understood where I was at as far as what my responsibilities entailed, as far as I couldn't hang out as long as they wanted to. I couldn't do certain things, and it wasn't something that I was upset with, but it was something that I had to kind of take inventory on and really sit with how this experience looks differently for me. And so for many student parents, they have to go through that mental transition, and it's not an easy one. And so being able to support them in all of that, being able to just listen, right, to what that looks like. It was very difficult in the beginning to transition to that way. So what I really want to leave you with is just putting yourself in the position of a student parent. Demira asked everyone, what does it mean to you to be a student parent? And in truth, that experience looks differently for every single person. But if I have to leave you with something, whether you are a student caregiver yourself, whether you are a faculty person or staff, I really, really encourage you to make sure that you are pushing students, or you yourself as a student are looking and finding your people. Lean into your village, even if it is not necessarily one that is embedded and there are people in your lives that you have to choose or that choose you. Ask for help. And like I said, ask again. Don't take no for an answer, because there's always a different way to approach a situation. There are many different ways to arrive at the same destination, and not everyone's path is going to look the same. And then also, I just really encourage individuals to search out and seek answers for themselves as well. Tap into those resources, because like I said, it may not be readily available. And sometimes you may have to push students to do that as well. Even if you yourself don't know, just taking that extra step to see if there's something that you can find out for them, and then share that with them so they can take that and move forward. And so I thank everyone for just listening to what my experience has been, and know that there's a great impact that you can have in the lives of many student caregivers. And if you're a student caregiver yourself listening, know that you definitely can continue to push forward. And this is something that is most definitely possible to do.
Oh, thank you so much, Olivia, for sharing your story and lived experience. I know that some of my students are here listening in today, and so having you share that personal testimonial of life as a student parent at UW-Milwaukee, I know is one that is both relatable and inspirational to them. So thank you for being here. So it is an honor for me to introduce our next panelist, Tora Frank. Tora Frank is a partner at Marigold Evaluation LLC, where she uses qualitative and quantitative methods to design and implement evaluations of social and educational programs. She holds a PhD in social welfare and a master's degree in public affairs from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research interests focus on the post-secondary experiences of students facing socioeconomic disadvantage, and her dissertation followed the college progress of low-income student parents as they worked towards their undergraduate degrees. Tora is also an award-winning instructor at UW-Madison, where she teaches courses in social welfare policy to undergraduate and graduate students in UW-Madison's Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work.
Hi, I am going to share my screen right away and start this. Oops, excuse me here for a little setup. Thank you, Rachel, for that introduction, and thank you to the task force for having me today. I'm always so pleased to be in a room, even if it's a Zoom room, where these kinds of discussions are centered, and where everyone is interested in supporting our college students who balance college student life with the essential responsibility of caretaking. So I have long been interested in working on issues related to college access and success for students who have, for various reasons, been structurally excluded from college education. And now I've been working for 17 years as a program evaluator on multiple projects that are related to college access and success for marginalized students, and then had the great privilege of doing my doctoral research focusing specifically on the experience of student parents who were participants in the Life Impact program at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And thanks to the phenomenal, because wonderful isn't strong enough, the phenomenal staff at the Life Impact program, including at least 2 folks who are in this room. And also thanks very much to the wonderful women who participated in the qualitative part of my study. I was able to analyze program data, both from participants and a set of students who applied to the Life Impact program and they were eligible for Life Impact. And in fact, they were deemed a really good fit for the program, but due to capacity issues, they weren't ultimately accepted. So that became my comparison group for my dissertation study. So I was able to look at the different progress of college students who were in Life Impact and those who could have been in Life Impact but were not. And then also, as I said, thanks to 12 women who were participants in the Life Impact program, I was able to conduct in-depth interviews with 12 women who were at the time single mothers. So unmarried was the definition of single used for that part of the study. And so So that's the research that I did. And I will also note that the experience of student parents is personally very important to me and relevant to me, as I had all three of my daughters during my graduate work, and in fact defended my dissertation while my three daughters attended Zoom school in May of 2020 in another part of the house. So while I had in listening to the experience of other student parents who have spoken today already, I know that I had access to a lot of privilege. As a graduate student, I was able to ask for help and really pretty readily receive that. But even with all of that, the experience of being a student parent is a very unique one, and the time demands alone are pretty serious. So anyway, today I'm going to talk about the Life Impact program that I mentioned, and I'm going to do this because it's an example of programming that was highly effective right here in our own UW system. And I'll share elements from the qualitative portions of my research on this program and offer some of the lessons that I hope are useful for anyone who seeks to understand and support student parents. So let me just give you an overview of the Life Impact Program's goals and kind of basics about the supports that it offered to participants. The overall goal, the overarching goal of the Life Impact Program was to interrupt the intergenerational transmission of poverty by supporting low-income student parents who were working towards first bachelor's degrees at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And the Life Impact Program provided a multitude, right? Really comprehensive support. So, but these are the kind of key program elements. There were multi-year strings attached, and I use that phrase, so performance-based scholarships at $5,000 per year for students who were enrolled full-time. So that's the performance-based scholarships. There's personalized support in the form of life coaching, kind of a combination of monitoring students, how are we doing, cheerleading, and really navigational support, but that support is very individualized. There's also other kinds of support that were offered, both financial, including importantly, the provision of emergency funds when students had some kind of financial stumbling block that was an unexpected expense. And then other kinds of things like social events, offering a special office where students had, could feel really comfortable gathering, family-friendly events and workshops and things like that. Okay. And then to offer you a description of some of the outcomes of Life Impact's work, right? A summary of the real successes of this program. This was a long-standing program, as Dr. Grady referenced in her talk, started in 2005 and ran until 2021. So that's a long-standing program. And during that time served 235 student parents who among them cared for 341 children. The program awarded more than $2 million in scholarships and about $250,000 in emergency funds, and had very, very strong success rates. So my research showed, and this was using data from a portion of the program's kind of duration of operation, so 2010 to about 2017, that about 63% of scholars graduated from UWM within that observation window, and more than 93% persisted or graduated based on that data set, so within that observation window. And my analysis of that quantitative data found that Life Impact participants had a 17 percentage point increase in their predicted probability of graduation compared to that comparison group of students who were considered a good fit for Life Impact, but were not ultimately accepted. So that's it. This is not a causal study. This is an association, but it was a strong and positive association. But you know what? I can describe the Life Impact program, but the best way to really understand how Life Impact worked is through the voices of Life Impact scholars themselves. And so, as I said, I was lucky enough to conduct these in-depth interviews with 12 single mothers who were single at the time of the interviews, and we randomly selected them from currently enrolled students. So that was important because it meant that we didn't pick students who really either wanted to say something positive or negative about Life Impact. We randomly selected them and had really strong rate at they all agreed to interviews, right? So we had 12 randomly selected women who participated in these interviews. Interviews conducted between late 2017 and early 2020. And I talked to these moms about what were the motivations that they felt that they had to pursue higher education and to get through. What barriers did they identify as most pressing? What supports did they think were most important? And I was able to conduct these interviews without initially revealing that I was studying the Life Impact Program, which was interesting and a great way to see whether the Life Impact Program was brought up as a source of support. And it absolutely was. So this is a quote that I think sums it all up very nicely. A student said, "I don't know if you know about the Life Impact Program. That is really where I started to kind of believe in myself. It is a program for student parents. It's a scholarship and it's also support. So you get a $5,000 renewable scholarship, but I feel like any scholar would say that the support was the biggest thing that, mattered the most." So I'm going to go through some of my kind of key findings. There's a lot of information and I'm distilling down, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what students' motivations were, what they listed as their primary motivations for getting through college. The 12 students I interviewed, of course, as 12 individual human beings, had varying motivations about why they wanted to get to college and why they wanted to get through it. But there were some very clear themes that arose throughout. First, the influence of children was a really primary motivator. Students uniformly mentioned that their children were a motivating force for them, both for their pursuit of higher education and their persistence towards their college degrees. And that is a finding that's really reinforced by a lot of other work on student parents. So it's not actually a surprising one, is it? But students also mentioned their families and their communities as motivating. They specifically, explicitly said that they saw their college success as a way to interrupt a cycle of disadvantage, a way to solidify their role as a kind of role model for others in their families and in their communities. They did talk about their career goals, and some of them were really driven by specific careers. So nursing, limnology, other very specific careers, and they wanted to do specific kinds of work, but others were less clear on what their goals were for after their bachelor's degree. But instead, they talked more about the identity of being someone who finished a college degree and about the credential more generally. They would say things, these are quotes, getting some kind of degree under my belt or putting a star on the board. So uniformly, students' goal commitment was absolutely immovable, right? So students, there was just actually, I thought that what Olivia said when she talked about her desire to get through college, she said, it wasn't a matter of if, but how I was going to do it. And that is exactly what these mothers in this study said. They said it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of how. They were going to find a way. They were absolutely unyielding in their pursuit of their degrees, even through many years and many, many attempts. They acknowledged that finishing could take a long time, that missteps were bound to occur, that they might have to be part-time, might have to stop out for a bit, but they were uniformly devoted to the goal. And picking one quote to represent this kind of motivation was really hard to do, but this is the one that I selected. So this mother said, I want to graduate. I want it more than anything in life. It makes me emotional because I want to set that example for my family. Like, we're very supportive. We're very loving. We have so much love to give, but most are teen moms and most of them don't have a high school education. Really none of them. I don't want this to be a generational thing. They do kind of look up to me. So that would be the main thing for me on graduation day, is my desire to really prove myself to them. Okay, so key barriers, and I'm going to break this down into a few different kinds of barriers because these were really important. So there were a lot of themes about barriers that arose. Prominent among them, again, I don't think you will be surprised to hear, was finances. Most of the life impact scholars, and certainly the scholars that I talked to, had their tuition covered between the Life Impact Scholarship was substantial and renewable, and they could count on it, and with other grants and scholarships. So these were Pell eligible students, and they had their tuition costs pretty covered. But they absolutely still voiced deep concerns about their financial stability, given their living expenses, given the costs of meeting basic needs. So this is one quote that kind of sums this up. It's extremely difficult to navigate, and you just feel fear. Where am I going to come up with this? Because, I don't have it. everything is stretched to the max. So in those situations, you have to basically, I don't know, take out payday loans or beg for help from family members. And that isn't always for sure because they just don't have the financial means to support you. Others said similar things, but that I thought was a good summary quote. So another barrier that, again, is not a surprising one was I think referenced by all of our panelists so far, just that a type of barrier they faced was this idea of role strain and severe demands on their time. So students balanced playing multiple roles, they weren't just college students, right? They were also employees and they were caring for their own children. They had other caregiving needs too. They were supporting parents, they were supporting grandparents. They were sometimes the primary English speakers in their family and having to navigate for others given that skill. So this strain absolutely affected participation in and performance in college classes. I thought this quote nicely summarized that sentiment. So this mom is describing the kind of the role that many of us who are parents understand is just that it's constant to take care of small children. And she's saying, and then I get them to bed about 9 and I am just completely exhausted. And that's the time where my time is freed up to do my schoolwork. And so some nights I don't even get it done. Sometimes I just quit trying. And the lack of sleep was another theme that many mothers brought up, was just that the only quiet time available to devote to studies was often those late night hours. So this is another barrier that emerged from these interviews. And this was really, I thought, a pretty interesting take that students had. They were facing navigational challenges, not in one system, but in multiple systems. So all college students have to learn to navigate college in some sense, right? They have to understand how to find a degree map, how to know when to seek and how to seek advising, how to get extra academic support, how to register for classes, how to fill out financial aid forms. But they also need to figure out how to benefit from all of the various extra resources that campuses offer. So things like mental health support, tutoring, mentoring, these kinds of supports that campuses have available, but students may not either know about them, they may have difficulty getting that support, they may not feel comfortable using that support. And so student parents have to navigate all of that as well. And low-income student parents have to also navigate safety net systems. So in order to get the help they need with things like Badger Care, with health insurance, with childcare subsidies, with child support, with cash assistance, with SNAP benefits, with all of these kinds of things, so they're navigating two systems. And the safety net systems, those also carry with them all of these costs in figuring out what the benefits are, taking the time to identify, to apply, to comply with the requests that are necessary, and also the psychological costs that can go along with these. We know from lots of research on welfare participation, for example, that this can be a very stigmatizing process. So many of the women in my interviews really mentioned that they really brought up as a barrier the need to navigate both of those systems. And further, the fact that sometimes those two systems actually intersect and make everything harder, right? So this mom has this quote, which maybe by now you've had a chance to read, but she's talking actually about accessing SNAP benefits. And she says it's really hard. They expect and they've required more information as the years have gone on. They want your scholarship awards. They want your tuition statement, which I don't see why that should even matter because all my scholarship goes towards school. And you have to renew like every 6 months, there's employment verification. And if you get child support, you have to show proof of that and your rent. And yeah, it can get stressful. And importantly, she says, and you're like, I've got to get this. What if we don't get it this time? So, you can think of these things as an exercise and like, oh, look at how policy is difficult when it's implemented. But you have to keep yourself in the lens of, this is a person who is wondering whether or not they will be able to continue to rely on that support that helps them feed their family, right? So looking at the benefits that Life Impact provided, there were a couple of really key themes. So I mentioned that the financial support was important, but it was really this level of individualized support, what the program refers to as life coaching, that students were just really excited to kind of sing about with me. So throughout their interviews, students strongly voiced the importance of these personalized, individualized and really knowledgeable support from the Life Impact program. So this student cast that support as being a first aid kit. And this imagery I thought is so powerful because it speaks to the fact that they felt Life Impact was a single source, right? It was a little box, and B, that it contained a bunch of different tools that could help them address their problems, no matter what they were, right? Whether you have a blister or a splinter, Life Impact can help you figure it out. So students over and over again voiced that the Life Impact staff were super knowledgeable, knowing those systems both within and outside of the college campus to help problem solve and advocate for students. Another really important aspect of this support was that these were consistent and personal relationships. These staffers, again, some of whom are in this very Zoom, stayed with the program for a long period of time. And students referenced the fact that these felt like chosen family for them, that they really built bonds with those Life Impact life coaches, and that these folks were accessible and available right when they needed them. And often when asked, students said that Life Impact staff was the one person who most cared about their success. So I'm just gonna read the bottom of this quote. So it's way deeper than just financial purpose. It's bonds and relationships that I built. Like, I don't think they know how much they affect all of us. It's not like, oh, here's your check. It's like, I care about you as a person. I care about your life. I want you to be healthy. I want the best for you. Like, that's them. Now, the scholarships were also important. And I certainly want to impress upon you that the value of having scholarships that students could count on, that were durable, that lasted over time and were substantial, those mattered, and students mentioned that they mattered. So those were the direct effects, right? Those scholarships reduced tuition costs and students could count on it being there. There were also indirect effects of these scholarships, and the students kind of mentioned them too. They said things like, the scholarships bring you to the table, but it's that support that helps you really stick around. So they voiced the fact that the scholarship requirements were kind of what got them in the door by mandating that they participated in certain things, meetings and various forms of support. But then they built those relationships and realized the value of those other support. So, what are my lessons to take away here? I think there's several, but the four I really want to leave you with are this understanding of this topic called administrative burden. This is what Hurd and Moynihan, whose book I highly encourage you to look at, what they talk about as the kind of difficulties, the friction that comes along with getting a benefit that you are eligible for. And so I urge campuses and all program providers to really think about, what does it cost for students in terms of their time and energy to receive this support? Do they have to ask for help repeatedly, or do we make that help come available to them? Then the value of institutional agents. So this idea of a really knowledgeable and caring figure that a person, a student, knows that they can start with. They trust that person, they can go to them, they have a relationship with them, and it's a safe place to start and ask a question. And then finally, understanding this goal commitment versus institutional commitment. As I mentioned, the mothers in my study were 100% committed to the goal. They were way less committed to any specific institution. 10 out of 12 of them had already started at other institutions. They had ended up at UWM. They did feel strong affiliation and commitment to the Life Impact program and some other sub-communities, but they were not interested in the university as it's kind of its own important tie, right? They didn't personally feel invested in being a UWM student. They felt invested in getting that bachelor's degree. And then the unique value of having these social ties, both with institutional agents, but also with peers who understand a shared level of experience. So those are the four things I want you to walk away from. I would love to talk more about Life Impact at any point, and I would encourage anyone to reach out to talk more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tora. I had heard those quotes before, but they were good reminders of why the work we do is so important. So thank you. I will pass to Jenny, who will introduce our final panelist.
Thank you, Rachel. I would just like to let everyone know that our forum will run till about 2:45 today. And again, just to remind you to please use the question and answer box to pose questions to our panelists. They'll try to answer questions as we're going along, or we might have a little bit of time here at the end. I'd like to introduce now our last speaker for today. Autumn Green, Dr. Autumn Green is an applied sociologist and research scientist at Wellesley Centers for Women, where she directs the Higher Education Access for Parenting Students Research Initiative, and is also a non-resident fellow at the Urban Institute, where she works with the Income and Benefit Policy Center and the Building America's Workforce team. As a nationally recognized applied sociologist and interdisciplinary scholar for the past 20 years, the vast majority of Dr. Green's work has reflected collaborative research and action partnership with scholars, research practitioners, advocates, and pregnant and parenting students, and sometimes their kids too, working together for transformational impact on the fields of higher education and two-generation post-secondary and occupational mobility pathways from poverty by and for student parent families across the United States. In her earlier life, Dr. Green was a young mother of two, working her way from GED to PhD. She's also witnessed both of her parents attend college at various points across her childhood, and we would like to welcome her today and look forward to hearing about her work in her presentation. So welcome, Dr. Green.
Thank you. I really want to appreciate the comment that Demira made at the beginning, that are we doing this, are we talking about student parents without them? And that, you know, I just want to acknowledge that being a student parent alum is not the same thing as being a student parent. And that at the same time, I think it gives us a familiarity and a closeness, and it creates the opportunity to recognize kind of where things didn't go right and where we might be able to transform that or change that. And I just really appreciate the panel today. I'm going to talk about some things that I think really resonate, but maybe at a higher level with what a lot of people said. And so just first thing that I was going to do, I have some links and things that I was going to share in the chat really quick. It is a public Google Doc, so you can go ahead and you should be able to see it and I think download it. So like I said, this is me. That's my daughter when we graduated from the University of Oregon when she was 2. She is now 21, so it's been a while. But this, you know, I think that just, you know, really resonating with this idea of doing work that is really rooted in the student parent experience. And one of the things that I heard in the panel, I have a colleague who's also a former student parent or parenting student. I'll get to that in a minute. Donna Munoz, who's at El Paso Community College, and she's doing a research study with her students about student parent culture and student parent mentor culture. And I've heard that culture resonate so strongly in this panel and in what I'm hearing both from the students who are represented and also from the panelists, which is really about supporting each other and really working to change things for the better for the next generation of parenting students. So if you can just switch to the next slide. So quick note about terminology. I consider student parents to be an identity term. So whether you are a parenting student, a student parent, a student caregiver, a student mom, a student dad, when I was in school, I was a low-income mom or a low-income mama, low-income student mama. It was what I went, my identity term. And I was actually part of some of the early conversations about needing to find an identity term. And recently we did this project called it's from something I'm going to share later called the Student Parents at the Center. We did this activity called What Are Student Parents Called? We filled 3 jam boards with sticky notes of all of the different names that parenting students or student parents are called. And I just really, you know, I think that all of these names are valid. And just want to acknowledge that when I try to flow back and forth between using all of the terms or some of, multiple terms, but I really mean the same thing, unless sometimes there is a specificity. So if I'm talking about a student who is parenting, who doesn't necessarily identify as a student, as a parent, I will try to use a term that fits with that identity. Student caregivers is another great example. But just recognizing that people have different identity terms. Sometimes people feel really strongly about their identity terms. So if you can just switch to the next slide. So this is just to show that we really, when sometimes, like people were talking about, when there's one office with one staff person for every single student parent, or that it can really feel like you're alone, that the university doesn't necessarily care about you or really get it. But that when we come together, that we actually have this amazing collaborative capacity to make things happen that really felt impossible on our own. And so I just thought that this image of all of the different campuses in the University of Wisconsin system, plus I added the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction because they are obviously a very important two-generation connection. Just really thinking about that there is this capacity when we come together. So if you can just switch to the next slide. So supporting parenting students helps universities meet their goals. It helps promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we talked about, supporting first-gen students, meeting targeted enrollment and revenue goals. Parenting students are a growing population, student caregivers are a growing population where, quote, traditional students are really not that traditional anymore. And I've been trying to find some more reliable statistics, but some of the things that I've been seeing lately just shows that the traditional student population is plummeting. So we have this disconnect right now between who is actually the students on campus and who the campuses have been designed for. And so part of the question is, how do we redesign, or how do we rework the campus system to be as supportive of today's college students as the students that they were designed for, that are no longer necessarily the predominant students on campus. So that's really how, when you do that, you meet your targeted enrollment and revenue goals. And you can also, as Victoria was talking about, you can increase retention, you can increase attainment when you support parenting students, because we see over and over again that when parenting students, student parents are supported, that their retention, their attainment, their grades are as good or better than the general student population. We have this idea that parenting students are not good students. Well, some of that comes from welfare mythology, or kind of ideas that people have about who parenting students are. Welfare mythology tells us that poor mothers are, they're not intelligent, that they're lazy, that they're just in school because they're trying to avoid getting a job. And none of that is true. None of it. It is all complete just nonsense. And it's been shown again and again. And it's really just rooted, like I said, in racism and classism and intersectional oppression of poor women and women of color, with that idea. The other thing that I think is really important, I'm going to try to get to it, is ensuring compliance. So there are actually some rules and regulations and laws that colleges we're finding over and over again. Our students just did a audit of the California public college and university system. California requires, for example, that there is Title IX information on about pregnant and parenting students on the websites of every college and university in the state. But we discovered that over 40% of public colleges and universities, and almost 2/3 of all colleges and universities, do not have that legally mandated information on their websites. We also found another college that I'm working with found, when we started actually looking into it, that they were in violation of about 10 different laws when you looked at federal law, state law, and city code. And so just making sure that, no university wants to be out of compliance with laws or policies. And so that's just another really important thing. So I'm just gonna keep going. I want to clarify a common misunderstanding. So you may have heard that 1 in 5 college students are parents. This is not true. So this is a little confusing because there is no such thing as half a person, and about it's actually about 1.5 in 5, but there's not, like I said, half a person. So how do we do this? When we actually look at the data, this is very specified data. It comes from the National Center for Education Statistics. And so, as you can see, I underlined that we're talking about dependent children. We're talking about FAFSA filers. Those are very specific terms and very specific populations that may leave some students out. Also, that statistic does not count graduate students or graduate students, not college students. And so when we actually, we can see that graduate students, as many people put in the chat and reflected, a lot of people are parents as graduate students, and actually more, a higher percentage of graduate students are parents. And so when we add all of that up, we actually find out that, and take into account that we know that a lot of people are not being counted. We are estimating that there are at least, and I put at least underlined and in bold, because as you can see on the slide, the actual quote is more than 1 in 5, but a lot of people miss that. And they just say 1 in 5 college students is a parent. No, 1 in 5 undergraduate students who files the FAFSA as a dependent child. But it's actually at least 5 million students, and probably a lot more, because we don't have any way to really know how many students are not being counted. So we can say pretty safely that more than 1 in 4 college students has a dependent child when we include graduate students. So if you can just switch to the next slide. I really want to get to the tools. So how many student parents are attending the University of Wisconsin? There is no publicly available institution, systems level, or state data available. So the data that I have come from the Great Lakes region, and I filtered it down to look specifically at public universities in the Great Lakes region, but that's the best I can do with the national data. In order to get better data, we really need to start looking at other data collection systems. So we can see what those statistics are estimated to be, but we really don't know what they are. So if you can just switch to the next slide. So just critical considerations for equity. I think everybody said this already, but that, student parents are dedicated, they're smart, they're really, really well-accomplished students. They are working really hard and they need support. And my slides got messed up, but there are a number of, in my links, evaluation studies that show, just like Victoria was talking about, that when parenting students are supported, they do as well or better than any other population of students. And considering how intersectionally marginalized they are, that is pretty important. So if you can just switch to the next slide. So this is the demographics. Again, this is from the National Center for Education Statistics. And as you can see, it's Great Lakes region, FAFSA filers with dependent children. But we do see that there is an overwhelming number of women who are parenting and Black and Indigenous students who are parenting. The thing at the bottom that got cut off is that Pacific Islanders and Native American students are disproportionately represented among parenting students, but they also don't usually show up in the data. And so we don't actually have data, but we can imagine that if we're looking at those populations, given the national statistics, that we would expect basically Black, Indigenous, and Latinx students are more likely to be parenting, as are women overall. And if you can just switch to the next slide. So the Spark Collaborative is a national partnership initiative that I'm involved in that really is working on bringing together the field to really transform change for parenting students. And we're talking about doing that through a combination of research and data strategies, knowledge sharing, building and developing collaborative strategies and partnership projects, promoting, elevating, and centering parenting students as leaders in all aspects of research policy. So the same thing where parenting students belong in every place that decisions are being made and knowledge is being created about parenting students. So nothing about us without us. And really what we're working for is changing opportunity systems. So our website is not up yet, but the 3 organizations here on the bottom are kind of co-hosting and co-organizing that, but not necessarily trying to take ownership. We really want this to be a collaborative, shared field-wide effort. And so if you're interested in learning more, there are contact information for people in the handout that I shared. If you can just switch to the next slide, because I really want to get to this big box of tools. So we have this great big box of tools, and I want to share just a few of those tools with you today. So if you can just switch to the next one. The ones I'm going to share today are the Student Parents at the Center framework, the Find Your Way research partnership, the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit, and Data to Action campaign. And the other 2 slides are probably pretty quick and we're not going to get too much time to talk about them, but I'd love to follow up. So if you can just switch to the next. So as Victoria was talking about, the things that parenting students have to navigating systems is so complicated. And when we think about this from a parenting student perspective, I work with a lot of policy experts who became policy experts because of this. And so if you can just switch to the next slide, because you can see that there are all these different systems, and then these are all the different programs that you have to navigate within those systems. It is so complicated. And that I wrote an article that was based on some of my own autoethnographic experience of navigating the system myself as a student parent, and also interviewing and working with other parenting students who are navigating these systems. And we ended up calling this an unspoken shift. So thinking about Arlie Russell Hochschild's talks about the second shift when women come home and have to kind of do the whole housework and everything at home. Well, poor women have to navigate all of this system and get no credit for it, get no acknowledgement for it whatsoever. And this is a skilled, very, very skilled talent. And people need help. When we're thinking about who, I think about who I was as a 17-year-old mom who was trying to figure this out. I couldn't have done this without somebody to show me the way. And really to guide me through it at first, because this is too complicated to expect any low-income parenting student to do on their own. And I'm happy to talk more about this, but also want to keep going. So what is a family-friendly campus? And just making sure to clarify the difference that a campus can be family-friendly, as people talked about, in the sense that it is family-friendly for faculty and staff, because that is a recruitment mechanism. That is a way to make your campus more attractive to top-level kind of job candidates. But being student parent supportive, it's a little bit different. And being kid-friendly, actually inviting children to come to campus and be part of the campus community, is another thing entirely. And so we have 2 kind of sister projects. And the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit was created by my colleagues at the Program Evaluation and Research Group. I was working in partnership with them at the time. And we really kind of developed a lot of that work, like I said, in partnership and together. But it has also been developed since then further. And it is a great free open source Creative Commons licensed resource that you can download online for free. And it really guides you through the process of how can we do this? How can we make our campus family friendly? Where do we start? The Find Your Way project is a grassroots parenting student-led research initiative where we have been comprehensively documenting the parenting student support program services, policies, and practices at every college and university. We've gotten through 23 states so far. So you can see where we've done so far, and we are planning to keep going. And I just want to keep going on the slides. So again, this is a grassroots research effort. I loved the way that that the other panelists were using this terminology of finding your way. This was the term that the students named this project. And they did this because they needed to help their peers find their way to a college or university. So how did they do this? They said, well, I don't know what other colleges have any support services or programs. I said, okay, well, like, how do we find out? Let's do some research. And we created these Find Your Way guides. We're in the process of creating a database that is going to be searchable. But we have done this entirely through kind of a grassroots research methodology where we've used partnerships, we've used fellowships, we've used all kinds of things. But the one thing that we haven't gotten is a direct research grant to do this. And we have found a way, and we've continued to keep going. And so we're really looking forward to bringing this to the Great Lakes region soon. And if you're interested in connecting with us about that, please reach out. If you can keep going. So this was a question that I had wanted to ask people. Is your campus already using the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit? I'm always finding out about new campuses that are using the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit. And it's so wonderful to hear about that. Like I've literally cried. Just thinking about also, are there opportunities if your campus is using the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit or another campus is using the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit, what are the opportunities for connecting across the UW system? And again, there's lots of things in the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit. I'm probably not going to get to all of them. So if you can keep going. So I really want to just skip ahead. I'm going to skip the Family Friendly Campus Toolkit and get straight to data, because I heard a lot of questions about data. And that is something that I can help with. So if you can just keep going, this is about task forces. This is more Family Friendly Campus Toolkit stuff. This is different considerations of family friendly campuses, and how to assess your task force, really focusing on the goal of equity. So the next slide, why do you need the data? How do you get it? So there's a difference between research, evaluation, and student enrollment data. So there's this idea that parenting students are a niche population, they're a tiny population. That they're not. And part of the way that mythology has been reinforced is because colleges and universities have not collected any data. So what are we kind of looking at? As I talked about, I think in one of the answers to the questions, that we started with FAFSA data, but the best system is really around, there's lots of reasons why we need the data. I've heard lots of people say that. If you can switch to the next slide, really, these are the different ways that people have tried to get the data, but the best practices around using student records level data, your institutional research office, they can add a question or questions, as we did in Oregon or are in the process of doing. We passed legislation last year that requires that every public college and university in the state of Oregon, and also Illinois passed this legislation as well, collects and reports institutional records level data about their pregnant and parenting students to the state office of higher education that every year. And that is something that they can track. That is something that they can look at disparate outcomes. They can disaggregate different types of groups. So anything that they've already collected, it just takes a couple of questions to ask about how many kids you have, how old they are, whether you identify as a parenting student or a student caregiver. And then they can find out all kinds of things. And this is something that in Oregon, they've been made really clear that the legislature, that with this data, they plan to go back to the legislature. So they're not planning on mandating all the colleges to do this without help, but that it gives them the opportunity to go back to the legislature and ask for allocations, ask for support, ask for resources, ask for program support. And so that is really, really important. And I am not sure how much more time I have, so maybe I will just keep going.
We're starting. Sorry, we should have done this forum for 2 hours, don't you think? So I think, Autumn, if you want to wrap up, we're going to do a Q&A for people who can.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, this is the Data to Action campaign. We are working on, this is a new project that we're working on in partnership with the Urban Institute. And we have some information if you're interested in more data. There is a forum at the National Student Parent Success Symposium in May about data collection that's going to be hosted by Erica Hernandez from Bowie State University, Heather Willoughby from UC Santa Cruz, and Michaela Martin, who is the champion of Senate Bill 564 in Oregon. Also, we'll be doing something else in the fall about this. And next year, we're going to have some technical assistance grants. I'm really hoping we can expand those to include universities. We're still fundraising for that, so stay tuned. And with that, I guess I will just transition. This is about Title IX. I really encourage people to look into Title IX. I partner with Jessica Lee, who's at the Pregnant Scholar. Jessica runs a free hotline for pregnant and parenting students who have experienced discrimination or exclusion. This was all taken from UW-Madison Dean of Students Office, but there's another slide that has more resources and information. So yeah, so I just, Title IX is really important. It has, there are a lot of protections that colleges and universities don't know about when it comes to Title IX. And a lot of colleges are not in compliance. So going back to that issue of, is your college in compliance with federal law? And, I think it's really important too that, there are some pretty serious consequences if you're, obviously if the Office of Civil Rights says, hey, you're doing this wrong, most colleges will correct that. But if they don't, they could lose all federal funding. And that doesn't just mean that means all federal funding. It means a research grant. It means FAFSA, anything that comes from federal student aid, it's all gone. So this is a pretty big deal to make sure that your college is in compliance. And also just big props to UW-Milwaukee for this wonderful graphic that I took off your website. And that, there are lots of resources and information, and I put more links in my handout. So that is it. The last slide was just about communities of practice that you can connect with, and those are also in the links.
Oh, you're on mute, Steph.
I think I was muted and then I unmuted. Autumn, thank you so much for the amazing presentation, and thank you for all of our panelists and for everybody for attending. I'm going to add our panelists back into the spotlight. We're kind of short on time. But I am going to hand things over to Jenny to facilitate a Q&A, and we'll just have some of our panelists I know have to leave for childcare reasons, and some people said they could stay a little bit longer. So if you're able to stay and want to pose some questions, please do so. Otherwise, we'll do our best to do an email response and get to questions that we weren't able to answer, and also to share out resources so that you can keep working on this. And we'll also provide a list of task force members on your campus so you know how to reach out and collaborate more with them. So I'm going to hand things over to Jenny, and thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And if you can stick around a little bit longer, we'll get through some of the questions.
All right, thank you, everyone. There is an open question in the chat or in the question and answer, and it says, I'm learning so much today, thank you. I think all students would succeed with personalized support. Are there any interventions that are uniquely helpful to student parents? For example, on-campus discounted childcare was mentioned earlier. Are there others?
We've been doing research on campus family housing and just the crisis that, 77% of parenting students are housing insecure or houseless, according to research from the Hope Center for College Community and Change. But my colleague Sarah Gallison and I did a nationally comprehensive study of how many colleges and universities in the country have family housing. It's like 254. And it's like 6% of all colleges. And we actually lost 28 campus family housing programs from the time we started collecting the data to the time that we updated the data in 2019. So in like 5 years, we lost 28 programs. So thinking about housing strategies is so important given the housing crisis that parenting students are dealing with.
I would add to that because working with population often that wouldn't even be able to afford to live in housing is how do we just make housing affordable for families? I think back to the data point, or just the data issue, is the strategy needs to match the situation. And I know we see student parents as a shared identity, but there's just multiple intersections in that are unique to regions of states, countries, and even institutions. So being able to make a wish list of what you wish you knew about your institution regarding student parents, student caregivers, parenting students, and have your strategies match the situation. What don't you know? What do you not know about these students? Assume you know nothing.
I see that we had a couple questions in the chat from earlier that some of our panelists went on to answer. I don't know if you'd like to expand on any of these. One talked about estimating the number of students who are also caregivers, and Autumn, you talked about that. But then the follow-up question was, why should all campuses invest significant financial resources in student caregivers, especially if the student caregiver numbers are overshadowed by additional underrepresented and oppressed groups of students and prospective students? Would anyone like to add anything to that particular question?
I think I added, I just want us to remember, when people say, why serve a student? I always question, why recruit that student then? So if you aren't going to say or put on in your diversity statements or inclusive statements, we mean this for everybody except for these populations, because we don't currently have enough resources to serve you, don't come here. If you're not willing to say that, then we need to figure out how to ensure that all students come to our institutions, have the opportunity for social economic mobility, can thrive, be retained, and be successful, as though we are culpable for their success. So if we're not willing to do that for every student, that would be where I would want us to figure out why not. And the question shouldn't be why, but why not?
Yeah, thank you for that. Any
I
other?
I just also would add that when you're talking about, you say that your goal is to support equity, diversity, and inclusion. You say that your goal is to support first-generation college students. You say that your goal is, that's who you're talking about when you're talking about student caregivers. And that, you know, it's a mismatch because people have this idea, we want to do this, that's kind of an ideological thing, but when it actually comes down to, oh, I didn't realize we were talking about them. And I've heard people actually use this terminology of like them, and students have reflected to me too, that they feel that there's kind of a sense of, those are their students and we're sort of the ones who slipped in the back door, and that they would really prefer just leave. And that there's actually multiple research studies that show this level of invisibility isn't just invisibility, it's hostility. And it's not acceptable. You know, as Demira was saying, it's just, you know, but that, you know, if your goals are around these populations, this is the population you're talking about. And I think that that's just really important to stress over and over.
Well, I don't think we have any additional questions. Those were the two that were in the chat. If anyone would like to post anything quickly, we can take those questions. Otherwise, I would just point you, Rachel posted in the chat the free virtual conference on student parent support that Autumn referenced, and the link is in there. And then also the document that has a bunch of resources as well in the chat. So if there aren't any questions, we'll give everyone just a second to type in. I know that takes, there's a question that just popped in here. So Autumn, the Great Lakes Initiative is coming soon, question mark. Like, so is it coming soon? And
Yes.
When and how to stay connected?
Well, please reach out to me. We are in the process of kind of planning and having that conversation. So Andrea, I will also reach out to you. So we are partnering with Tiffany Mara at CEW Plus at University of Michigan, but also really planning to work with a network of campus providers and students across the Great Lakes region to bring that not just the research study that includes kind of documenting what's on each campus, but also really thinking about how do we use this as a tool for transformational change? So how can we use that great big box of tools that we have to really understand what change is needed across the system and develop some systems level strategies with the people who are closest to parenting students, including parenting students themselves.
Well, I just want to take a minute to thank all of the presenters today. I mean, just a powerful group here, and I appreciate all of the the personal aspects and how that's guided you along your path, and then obviously the work that you are doing now. So we thank you very much for that, and we thank all of the participants for coming today and for listening and for asking questions. And I hope you have a good rest of the rest of your Friday. So thank you. And we'll just hang on here until everyone logs out. But have a good afternoon. All right, well, thank you, everyone. We'll stop the recording now, I think.